Welcome to Herbally Yours, an adventure into the world of natural medicine. Here is your host, Dr. Ellen Kamhi, the natural nurse who will help you take the leap to ultimate wellness.
Greetings, and thank you so much for joining me, Ellen Kamhi, the natural nurse, for another edition of Herbally Yours, right here on the Voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. Herbally Yours brings you the latest information about the many facets in the world of natural living. And you can join us for so many classes by just going to naturalnurse.com and click on calendar. You'll see them there. Today, we are so happy to have as our guest, George Paraskevakos. And he may have to help us with his last name. But George is the executive director of the International Probiotics Association. That's an important group whose mission it is to promote the safe and efficacious use of probiotics throughout the world, while being the global voice of probiotics. As a probiotics expert and scientific strategist, George has developed international outreach programs, both for regulators and educators, for healthcare providers and consumers. Since his designation as executive director, he has grown the association from 40 to 110 companies, hosted numerous international probiotics conferences, published extensive probiotic papers and articles, and collaborated with fellow associations to further knowledge about probiotics, effectiveness, and safety. He is also on the advisory council for the Center for Digestive Health at Rutgers University, my alma mater, also Southwest College of Naturopathic Medicine and Health Sciences, and the Alliance for the Education of Probiotics. So thank you so much for joining us today, George.
Thank you for having me, Ellen. And you did well on my family name. It's Paraskevakos. Thank you for attempting that.
So would that be Greek, perhaps?
Yes, it is. That's right.
My grandmother's Greek, and lots of names like that.
Yes, very long.
So now at Rutgers, it's interesting that you're involved with Rutgers, because I actually went to Rutgers, and my degree is from there. One of the degrees I have, and they have a lot of interest in things that are something that I would call natural medicine. There's a whole department there of natural pharmacology about the medicinal plants, a whole program there about that. So it's interesting to see that they're actually on board as a university with your work.
They contacted me a few years ago, and actually they wanted to look into initiating a gut health project and a lab that was going to be based out of the university, and it hasn't been ramping up as fast as we would like it to, but I mean, there's been some changes in the personnel, but we're also starting to see exactly what you said. There's a lot of other schools and universities that are getting on board with the natural health program available, and it's good to see because prevention, I think, will be key going forward, especially with what we've lived this past year.
So true. And I always get all the newest research that comes out through the national academies, and they send me all the newest research that has been going on. And there's so much going on with gut health. But before we go forward, I don't want to confuse our audience. So let's right away tell them and share why, when we're talking about probiotics, are we also talking about some other hot words such as gut health and the microbiome?
So probiotics, I mean, historically, they've been in our existence for many, many years, from thousands of years back when, lactic acid bacteria was used to ferment foods and to preserve foods up until 100 years back when, some of the early onset research has started to become more known on how promoting gut health was, the way to a healthier life and prolonged life. That was Mechnikov's first work. Since then, the science has so much ramped up. And yeah, microbiome has been a very hot word that people have been using and dropping it in different, articles and stories. But probiotics are within the microbiome, which is an ecosystem, probiotics is just an entity or a bacteria within. There's so many other things going on in the microbiome, in this, vast ecosystem that we ourselves, are harboring. And basically, from the latest research, 5 years ago, we'd say, we were 50% bacteria, 50%, human cells. The latest research suggests more like 90% bacteria and 10% human cells. So bacteria outnumber us by a lot.
And that's in each person's own body we're talking about.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, think about your gut. The gut at any point can contain anywhere between 1 and 2 kilos of gut bacteria. Just the gut alone. Let's not even talk about all the other areas of our body, the lung microbiome, the oral, our skin, we're basically covered. So a lot of scientists say we're here to help harbor that bacteria's, existence. So it's a fascinating world, and the science is advancing so quickly and outside of classical areas that everybody, connects bacteria with being gut health. The science, and we published a paper, and if you'd like, we can get into it a little later, but the science is showing your gut connects to the rest of your body, and it actually, if it's modulated in a positive way by actually giving it good foods, can be it either could be a precursor to disease or basically to very, very, a very healthy existence in life.
No, well, please do at this point tell us more about that paper, or maybe where our listeners who are interested might want to find that. Do you have it on your website, internationalprobiotics.org?
Absolutely. That paper was published a couple weeks, maybe months ago. Sorry, it was more at the end of August. So a lot of people talk to me about how probiotics, there's no science to back what probiotics do. There's no science to show benefits. And I just got tired, and I've been at the IPA, or the International Probiotics Association, for 5 years, and I just got tired of hearing these naysayers or critics. And I talked to some independent researchers out of Europe, and I said, could we look into this? And they said, yes, absolutely. So there's many, many databases where clinical trials in humans are registered. We just looked at 2. One was a World Health Organization, the WHO-backed database, ICTRP, and then the other one was in the U.S., clinicaltrials.gov, which is run by the U.S. National Library of Medicine, part of NIH. So we looked at just those 2 databases, and we came up with over 1,600 clinical trials that were registered in humans. And most of those trials have been in the past, I would say, 4 to 5 years. The indications were very classical, stuff that resonates with consumers, GI health, GI support, immune support, autoimmune condition support. And then the other fascinating work that we saw was all the other non-conventional, type of research that, like the gut and how it relates to mood. So gut-brain was a big one. Metabolic syndrome was another one. Skin and allergy was another one. So there's over 700 different types of indications that were registered from these 600 and some odd clinicals. Now, what's interesting is all critics said, okay, great. We know there's science, but we don't know what the outcomes were. Hence, part 2 on its way. We're looking at all those different types of indications, and I want to see what were the outcomes. What were the conditions research, and what were the actual outcomes out of this, out of all these trials that were conducted. So that paper can be found on our website, internationalprobiotics.org.
And that's an important one for people to know about. So, Herbally Yours listeners, I want to remind you that you are listening to Herbally Yours on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. I'm Ellen Kamhi at naturalnurse.com, and today my guest is Mr. George Paraskevakos, and he is the Executive Director of the International Probiotics Association. We're talking about probiotics, gut health, the microbiome, and you can find out more at internationalprobiotics.org. Now, George, as you mentioned, the concept of what we'll use another word, fermented food, such as yogurt, especially plain yogurt, kimchi, pickles, kefir, and kombucha. People have heard about some of those things. Do they supply the body with these needed microbes that you're talking about?
That's a great question, Ellen. I like that question because I get it all the time. Oh, why do I need probiotics? I can get it through my foods. Yes, you can. I mean, all the foods you mentioned, yogurt, kimchi, pickles, kefir, all these are great, I would say, options to have, and they supply the body with good microorganisms. Bacteria, which is used to ferment the foods, but at the same time, it gives the gut good bacteria. But they're not necessarily, the bacteria used to ferment aren't necessarily probiotic organisms. You have to look at the label. There's criteria that we've published that, a bacteria can be deemed a probiotic. And that's based on the WHO definition and other guidelines that are published around the world from different governments. But, you have to make sure your bacteria is safe. It has to be, it's the foods that we talked about, if they need to be fortified with these types of bacteria deemed to be probiotic, to be qualified as probiotic. So, like I said, the organism, has to be properly identified and characterized at the DNA level. I mean, that's almost obligatory across the different countries and governments that do actually commercial probiotics in their country. So you have to be identified properly, characterized. Then the next thing you got to make sure is they're safe. So there's safety lists. So if the strain is very important. So if the strain belongs to species on these safe lists, then you can deem the probiotic as being safe. So there's all these different types of boxes to check. You got to make sure there's no antibiotic resistance. Bacteria can harbor that. You got to make sure that the bacteria you're putting in your body don't have any of this, or they harbor the gene that transfers that, to other bacteria in your body. So these lists of guidelines and criteria, you can find these on our website. We have a document that says bacteria or what can deem bacteria to be probiotic. I mean, it's very, very simple, boxes to tick off. And then when you're going to the grocery store to buy foods, that contain microorganisms or that have been fed with microorganisms, make sure they're fortified with probiotics. Or on the label, you can find that out. You look at the strains and make sure they're strains that are deemed to be probiotic organisms.
So you have the list of things that are called probiotics, just to tell our listeners, so we're using so many terms. Many people think about microbes being a bad thing, such as bacteria being a bad thing. But that's why the word probiotics is the fact that many bacteria, which of course our body has more of them than our own cells, are not only friendly, but very specifically needed for various metabolic processes. And you can find the list of good bacteria at internationalprobiotics.org. Now, when a commercial company, puts out a product and labels it as probiotics, I'm not talking about here's some good food, sauerkraut. We talked about sauerkraut and kimchi. Those are foods. But when we're actually going to the store, and there's whole sections now that say probiotics, people are selling them, does the commercial companies have to, is there any regulation in place so that they only are offering, and in the right amounts, the probiotics that you have that are good and meet all those safety requirements? And you have that list at internationalprobiotics.org. Does everybody have to adhere to that advice?
Absolutely. I mean, I won't talk about the world, because the divergence in regulations that exist are at a country level are very different, and that's part of the work that we do at IPAs. We talk with government agencies, but let's specifically hone in a little bit in the U.S. I hear about that all the time, that probiotics or even dietary supplements aren't regulated. That is not true. That is so far from the truth. It's not a true statement. If you look at, it's a misconception. If you look at the FDA, they have GMPs, or good manufacturing practices, that companies need to follow when they actually produce and manufacture and commercialize a probiotic. So just from the manufacturing element, that takes care of the quality and the safety. And then you have the DSHEA, which is DSHEA is the Dietary Supplement Health Education Act, which was brought out in 94. I mean, this alone takes care of the probiotics, the probiotics and supplement side of things. So you have two guidelines which are very available, not only to consumers or healthcare professionals that want to see what is it that you need, but that companies need to adhere by to be able to commercialize a product. And if you don't, then, well, you'll have to put up with the FDA or even the FTC, depending on the types of claims that you make on your product after it's been commercialized.
So those are for good, respectable players. Of course, there could always be the, fly by night, make every kind of claim,
yes.
Take this probiotic and who knows if it's made well and all kinds of claims. It'll stop cancer and stop COVID. And
yes.
We're seeing that online right now.
We are a lot. And yes, and I mean, our work doesn't, that's why our work is never ending, because there are bad players in the market. And what we've tried to do, and by discussing with governments all the different types of guidelines and best practices that we put out, we advise them. We'd like to raise the bar in the quality and the safety of the products to make sure that these players kind of go away, and eventually we educate the consumer or the end user communities, being the healthcare providers, that what they need to look for when it comes to a commercialized product.
That's a good idea. Let's talk about that.
Sure. We have a labeling practices, best guidelines. What should you look for? And I've done a few shows in the past where I have healthcare professionals telling me, George, what else should I buy? I don't know what should I recommend to my patients. And I said, well, here's we have a bunch of infographics you can download, and there's certain elements that the label should contain on the product, like make sure you have CFU count of bacteria, make sure your strains are listed, make sure that, there's an expiry dating, because we profess that, your CFU or on your label should be at the expiry dating, which should be, 1-2 years out, depending on how the product is. So there's all these guidelines.
So people should look for an expiration date.
Absolutely.
They should look for a list of strains.
Strains, yes.
They should see sort of a measured amount of how much of each they're going to get per dose.
Correct.
Okay.
The CFU total on the label, that should be available to you at the expiry dating. And then there's other criteria.
So let me explain that to our listeners. You're talking about that a claim should be made about how active these strains will be at the expiration date, because then what we usually do, because I work in the industry, is they put more in initially, so that's called overage, so that it's still active by the expiration date.
Correct. And that should be, every responsible company should have done their stability testing. So you put your mix or your single probiotic product in a bottle, and you run the stability testing, and that'll give you an indication of how long the probiotic is good for. It's active because it's live microorganisms. There's a life to that, right? Eventually, they die off. It's not an innate chemical substance like a vitamin or a mineral, which might lose its efficacy over time. Whereas a probiotic, being a live organism, because that's part of the definition of live organism, should have a specific dating to it. And that, like I said, the responsible companies have done their stability testing to be able to put that dating on it.
Now, what about the discussion and certainly the confusion for consumers when they go into any kind of store? It used to be only in the health food store, and now it's in the drugstore, every major drugstore, as well as online. So, from the time I've been involved with this, which is 1964, till now, there's been a massive growth in the probiotic industry. So there's several splits. So one split is between refrigerated products and non-refrigerated. Can you explain that to us?
Absolutely, yeah. And that's another good question, because I get that often. It's like, do probiotics expire? Like I said previously, absolutely. They're live organisms. And There are ways, because the technology has increased or has advanced, there are ways to create a formulation of probiotic products which you can leave on the shelf. And that depends on the type of standardizing material you use. Some are drier than others because probiotics prefer darkness and they prefer drier conditions, right? And less heat. So depending on what you standardize your probiotic mix with, you can leave it on the shelf, depending if it's a sachet or if it's a capsule or if it's a powder in a glass bottle. So there's ways to actually formulate products that can go on the shelf. They have to respect, obviously, they have to be not too much in conditions where they're very, very warm, and so depending on and then there's others that can stay in the fridge. There's also something that I don't want to get too much into the weeds, but depending on the genus of bacteria you put, so a lactobacillus versus a bifidobacterium, that balance can also play a huge role on a probiotic being stable on the shelf or actually needing refrigeration. So all the manufacturers who actually put out products should know these things. Personally, I recommend to store, whether it's a shelf stable or not. Personally, I recommend store it in the fridge. You're going to get more legs out of your product. It's going to stay fresher. And if anything, it'll be a compliance element where you open the fridge next to your milk. You can have, don't forget your capsule at the same time you take your milk out, either for your coffee or have a glass. So that's my recommendation.
Okay, so you're saying there are strains that are more stable, which are being marketed as shelf stable, do not need refrigeration.
Yes.
In the old days when these products first emerged, they were all in the refrigerator. So you'd have to go to the local little teeny health food store in those days.
Yes.
And they have a little teeny refrigerator with a handle, if you probably remember them, that you pull down. They don't exist anymore. And in there would be your probiotics, no more. Now they're often in the refrigerated section as well at a large retailer, and then also on the shelf. And you're saying either of those might be very valid if it's being made the correct way by a responsible manufacturer.
Correct.
And either way, you certainly are someone we should listen to as the executive director of the International Probiotics Association at internationalprobiotics.org. You're recommending to just keep them all in the fridge anyway.
Yes.
Okay.
You'll just get more legs out of your product, and why not? I mean, it's not taking much space.
Because it doesn't hurt it to refrigerate.
No, it doesn't. Absolutely not.
So, but let's say you're going to travel, you might want to purchase one that says it's shelf stable because you're going to have it in your suitcase. Well, in the old days when we used to travel all over to travel all over the country every week practically.
Correct. Yes, correct.
So that's really, really good information. Now, what about how often? Because since these actually become, especially when your body's in balance, a natural part of your internal flora, do people really have to look at taking probiotics every day? And could you use too much?
I take one daily. I recommend to take one daily. If you choose a product which is actually, like I said, adheres to the guidelines we put out, make sure that your strains are on there, because we always profess strain specificity. If you think about it, over time, a probiotic is a supplement to supplement what you eat daily, because we don't necessarily get all the proper good bacteria from our food supply. So as a preventive measure, all these things build up over time. So I would think, you'd have good gut health. You'd have good support for your immune system. So these things don't happen overnight. I think it's something which it'll help you just continue building it, and you have a preventive way going forward. And especially what's happened with this, pandemic, people are looking towards options on how they can, over time, just find something that will help modulate, help support or prevent, these types of situations. And I'm not saying a probiotic taken every day will help you fight a pandemic, but what it'll do is it'll boost your immune system. It'll modulate your gut bacteria. It'll help, bolster your immune system, that eventually maybe something, that you come across, and it's something that will come at you or attack your immune system can have a positive response to fight against something like this.
What about, is there a way people can get tested to see what kind of state their own microorganisms and microbiome is in, and if they need any kind of supplementation or change?
There's tests. There's no specific test to tell you what is missing. So the tests that exist out there is something that'll tell you what your gut actually has. There's swab tests that they'll do, fecal swabs, what have you, and they'll test what your bacteria or what your gut contains in terms of bacteria. So it's more of a picture of that moment in time. I always like to say your bacteria or your gut is as specific to you as your fingerprint or your DNA. So not one test could tell the entire population of a city or what have you what is actually missing. So that's why we say a bacteria or a probiotic on a daily basis will help you add diversity into your gut. Because not everybody's, gut microbiome is exactly the same as, the other person. So by adding, good bacteria or a probiotic, you're actually giving your gut bacteria or increasing its diversity, which all the science points towards diversity being, one of the elements that can help you give you a good gut health.
There's so much to talk about, and we're almost out of time, but I just want to say I was at a conference the other day that was talking about the fact that babies that are born through cesarean section often have various kinds of health issues linked to incorrect microbiome because it was not inoculated in a normal way at birth.
Yes.
So endless topics to discuss.
We can be here for another hour or two for sure. But yeah, that is so important. Depending on the birth mode and C-section, I've read a lot of papers regarding C-sections. They're not actually the babies aren't seeded like they should from the mom's natural bacteria because the vaginal flora is 90% lactobacillus strains. So as the baby is born through natural childbirth, obviously it'll be on it. It'll probably swallow some of that bacteria. So it seeds its gut microbiome very differently from a C-section baby. I want to mention, if I have a quick 30 seconds, there's
that's about what you have now.
Okay. There's research out of NYU. The researcher's name is Dominguez Bello, and she's I think 8,000 or 9,000 or even 10,000 babies in. What they do is C-section babies. It's been going on for many years. They'll swab the mom, and then they'll swab the baby with the mom's bacteria.
Yes, I've seen that too. But thank you so much, and thank you for being our guest. The best place to find out more is at internationalprobiotics.org.
Thank you.
And thank you, listeners, for tuning into Herbally Yours, produced in the studios of 90.3 WHPC, Nassau Community College, Garden City, New York. For further information, email us at whpc@ncc.edu. This is your host, Ellen Kamhi at naturalnurse.com, inviting you to join us next week for another edition of Herbally Yours. Until then, stay healthy.